second. And the second part will be in our network app, where you came into this first part of the session. Maybe Graham, you can show the next slide, because during this part, we like to interact with our audience, and this can be done in two ways. You can ask your questions in the Quest in the network app. You can do that now, but you can also do that after the session, maybe tomorrow. You can also give their answers to questions from other people, and you can use the Zoom chat function, of course. And we hope to have as many questions as possible to have an interactive discussion. So now I'd like to give the word to our moderator, which we're very grateful to have, Graham.
Thank you very much, Clarissa, for the introduction, and to ISBT and DPI for setting up this session. Very warm welcome to everybody. I just want to make everybody aware that we're going to record this session so that people can view it afterwards. So you should be able to see that it's being recorded on your screen. It's my job today to moderate this session, and I'm very pleased to introduce three speakers, very knowledgeable on the subject on EPR. The first is Joachim Koidem from EXPRA, the Association for the Non-Profit EPRs in Europe. Mike Jefferson, a colleague who works with me on the CFlex project, to explain more about the, sorry, I haven't got my video on, have I? Let me start the video, might help. He's going to explain to us today about the work that we're doing on EPR schemes and what criteria they might need to deliver to support the circular economy. In our case, for flexible packaging, but it should be much different from anything else. And then we have Felix from ours. And he's going to give us the brand owner perspective. As you're aware, brand owners and retailers and people putting products onto the market are what the law calls producers, and they are the producers in the extended producer responsibility, or EPR as we're going to call it today. So if there are questions, please put them in the chat. We will come to them at the end of the session. If there are clarification questions, I will try and do that at the end of each speaker. But other than that, I think it's about time to get a move on and give a short introduction into EPR. So CFlex first, who are we? We're a project above all. In this project, we have 180 stakeholder, call them stakeholders because they're companies, associations, and all parties who have a vested interest in making flexible packaging circular in Europe. We started in December 2016, and we've been going for just over 4 years now. And you can see we represent the full value chain that participates and combines to make the flexible packaging value chain. The objective of this project is to make flexible packaging circular in Europe by 2025. We're going to talk today primarily from the perspective of flexible packaging, but I just wanted to give you some perspective on where flexible packaging fits into the bigger picture. So the bit that CFlex is focused on is the 5.6 million tons in the middle there, the blue circle. But we're increasingly recognizing that we need the non-household flexible packaging in there as well, because that's a significant amount of material. And there you can see on the left-hand side the full picture of the plastics that are put onto the market, round about 26 million tons per year. And you say, well, that's a lot of materials. But if we then take a step back, because EPR is not only about plastics, it's about all materials. We see that the total amount of materials in 2018 was 77 million tons of packaging materials being put onto the market that EPR needs to manage in one way or the other. And EPR is the way that Europe has chosen to collect, sort, and recycle it to make sure that the producers, the people putting the packaging onto the market to sell their products, can meet the legal recycling targets set by the Packaging Waste Directive, but also transpose into national legislation, because those targets can be higher in certain member states. So there you see plastics are 19% of the overall picture, overall materials put onto the market, paper and board being the biggest, and then you would followed by glass, wood, and that's by weight. So EPR covers the full spectrum. Today we're looking at it, if I just jump back a slide, from the perspective of that blue box, but increasingly the grey box part of the circle that's next to it. How are we going to do that? It's not that complicated. You have to collect it if you want to make it circular. If you collect it, you need to sort and recycle it. And we already know how to do that for the monomaterial fractions. The monomaterial fractions are somewhere just shy of 70% in the flexible packaging consumer household flexible packaging market. We then have the third step, which is about saying, well, if we know how to sort and recycle monomaterials, why don't we make more of the multi-materials monomaterials? So we have this redesign step, but we recognize that we can't do that for everything. So we are going to have to find solutions for those other materials which can't be made monomaterial. And then in parallel with all of that, perhaps the most important part, if you're going to collect, sort and recycle these materials, what are you going to use them for? They have to have end markets. They have to be competitive against the virgin alternative, and have to be available in sufficient quantities and qualities for those end markets to use them. And those are the 5 steps that we believe are necessary to realize the circular economy for flexible packaging. But they're also the same 5 steps for all the materials out there. We've taken those 5 steps and distilled them into 3 big boxes. The one is about design of the packaging itself. The second one is about infrastructure that you need to collect it, sort it, and recycle it. And the third bit is about how do you make this work longer term, sustainably, from a environmental impact perspective, but also from a cost perspective, because people aren't going to recycle or sort or collect the packaging materials if there's not a business case in it for them, and they can make money. So if we look at those 3 areas, and I've offered a few bullets there in terms of how we would do that, we see that EPR is the glue which makes all of these things possible. So with that as a short introduction into EPR and how it works, I want to hand now over to Joachim to talk you through a little bit about EXPRA and how EPR in the systems that belong to EXPRA operate. Joachim?
Yes, thanks a lot, dear Graham, for the kind introduction, and even more thanks a lot for allowing us to participate here in this conference and to provide you with our point of view and hopefully with some interesting information. Here we are. Just very short for those who are not fully familiar with EXPRA. We are a network of currently 27 non-for-profit PROs, respective partners. Most of my members are located in the European Union, as you can see here in darker green, but we also have some further members from other European countries and even from abroad, like Quebec in Canada, Turkey, Israel, and we have industry as a partner in Chile at the moment, because they have the task to build up an EPR system as well. So they are in a stage where many countries in Europe have been 10, 15, 25 years ago, and we try, of course, to support them as much as possible. Besides the work with our members, and besides, of course, the classical Lobbying, we are trying to do together with industry. We are supporting a lot of initiatives like CFlex, of course, but CFlex is one part of the big picture, like in the more theoretical groups, European Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform, but also for other materials like glass, paper, etc., so that on the long run, we are able to move all packaging to circularity. And as you can see that, EPR is not only a European phenomenon anymore. It started in Europe a little bit later in Canada and Japan as well. So it started in the most developed countries, but in the meantime, it is spreading to the other continents as well. And you can see initiatives, legislative, but also voluntary initiatives of industry in most of the other countries as well. So even more a need to exchange experience, understanding, knowledge, best practices. And I guess that in the future, CFlex will also serve as a model and the best case in other continents as well, especially if we would see EPR in the United States in future, which seems more and more likely. So what we learn here, I think we can help in other countries as well. Just to remind you, EPR is in first case an individual responsibility to companies, mainly to those companies who have the power to design the packaging, who are telling the packaging producers, asking the packaging producers for the certain characteristics, what purposes the packaging should fulfill. And in the past, this demand was concentrated usually on the protection, the delivery of a product to the consumer, some marketing needs as well. Nowadays, with EPR, the end of life of a packaging is part of these demands as well. We try to take into account the needs for the end of life management as well. And this is, for example, shown in the design guidelines that the CFlex members developed in the last years. Part of this responsibility can be transferred to a collective entity, the so-called producer responsibility organization, especially when it comes to the collection of packaging from the households, because it would not make sense if each of the companies would go to each of the households to try to get back their own packaging. So we pool this responsibility within the PRO, so that we do this collection and then sorting and recycling on behalf of all the obliged companies. And then we ask for a fee, and these costs are then integrated in the product price. And that's somehow how the job. It's not only to collect the necessary funding, but a bit more general, to keep this circle turning. Collecting the necessary funding so that the financial gaps, especially on the collection and the sorting side, are filled, and partly the financial gaps for the recyclers as well. Some packaging we collect, we are able to gain money. For some, we have to inject money so that it is kept in the loop. But like in every wheel, you can understand that each of the stakeholders we are mentioning here needs to do his job, his part of the responsibility, because otherwise the wheel is not turning in the right way. And I think you remember from your bicycle times how difficult it is to run the bicycles if the wheel is not fully round. So that's the job in the best case of the PRO, to keep this wheel turning in an optimum way. what did we achieve in the past? So EPR exists since nearly 30 years in many countries, and just to remind you that up to now, up to recently, industry was asked to fulfill minimum targets. And for plastics, these have been 22.5%. And most of the countries translated it only in the minimum way, 22.5%. And the EPR systems were designed and asked just to fulfill the minimum requirements. I think we see latest with the circular economy package, but also with the current environmental situation for all the companies. We see a shift in the mandate, not only to try to fulfill the minimum targets, but to make packaging circular. I think this is a different mindset, a different job for industry and for EPR. But I think this has to be kept in mind when we see the current performance. Many countries are just over the minimum targets. Some countries are far ahead with the official figures. But again, have in mind, this is the old measurement point, and there was never a check by the Commission on the background of the figures. So old measurement point means that you calculate at the entrance door of the recycler. In the future, we are moving this measurement into the recycling plant just in front of the extrusion. And if you go to a recycler, you will see that a lot is happening between the door and the extrusion. Some further checking, sleeves are taken away from rigid packaging, etc., etc. So we will lose between 10 and 30% depending on the plastic material, the plastic packaging of the current performance. On top, there are logical rumors that some countries are reporting to Brussels at the moment what they collect and not what they have sorted out. So as the Commission has announced to check what member states are reporting, you have to take this into account with some of the countries as well. So as soon as we are reporting with the new requirements, I think this picture will totally change, especially for some of the countries. So even more ambition is needed in many countries than today. And not only the way how countries are reporting was up to now very, very diverse. Also the way how EPR and most of the countries, 26 of 28 or 25 of 28 are using EPR. Also this was done in an incredible variety. So I think everything what is possible has been used by the member states. So many member states have chosen just to accredit one PRO in the hands of obliged industry, non-profits. In several other countries, you have competing PROs up to 40 or even over 40, like in Poland, some of them owned by industry, non-profit, many owned by waste management companies, by investors, by unknown people, even in the meantime owned by retail, full cost, part cost, incentive cost. Even within competitive systems, there are big varieties where, for example, the same infrastructure for collection is shared, like in Germany and Austria, up to different PROs in different areas, up to, like in Estonia, that 3 PROs have to establish parallel infrastructure. In some countries, the EPR system is fully in the hands of industry, so that industry is calling for tender for collection, sorting, and recycling. In other countries, this is purely done still by the local authorities, and industry is only signing a check up to now, so with limited influence even on what is sorted out and what is sent to recyclers. After all these years, I think luckily the European institution have understood that that some streamlining is needed, some streamlining. So the EU legislation, as we will see in the next slide, has agreed to have some minimum requirements for EPR system. But even if we have more streamlined EU legislation, there is still the respective national implementation with some room for maneuver. And then, of course, the PROs have some room for maneuver and can take certain decisions. And if industry is owning the PRO, of course, this is up to industry how to fill the gap, how to fill the room that we have within national legislation. Do we go for just the minimum targets? Do we go further? Do we include all packaging in our sorting activities and recycling activities, etc., pp. But of course, this is all limited a bit because the concrete collection model is usually decided by the local authorities, whether you collect by bins, by bag, by container station, by recycling targets, bag in bin. Again, everything is possible here. Just to name, in Germany, I learned that even after 30 years of EPR system, we still have 50 different collection systems in the end, which makes it not easy in the federal communication with our inhabitants. So I think Belgium was quite lucky that after all the years, after 20 years, they were able to agree with all local authorities to have the same collection system now. This is helping a lot. But also, of course, a lot of other topics, a lot of questions for EPR, how it should run best, is now answered by the minimum requirements for EPR, which should now be transposed in the national legislation, I think latest applicable from 23. And I think it's quite remarkable that a lot of these demands are done to our governments, so that they have to clearly fix the role and responsibilities of each stakeholder within the EPR system, that they have to implement a functioning monitoring system, and that they have to enforce. Well, you might ask, isn't it clear, natural, if you put a legislation, if you put obligations to someone, that you have as a government to monitor and to enforce it? It should be logical, but it has not been done. In Germany, I think this was for a very long time one of the biggest problems, that there was more or less no monitoring and even no enforcement. That's why they created the central agency now to do minimum the monitoring and to prepare the enforcement for the authorities. Again, a learning from the experience that you have to have an independent oversight and enforcement in case of competition. So that all the countries which accredit more than one PRO have to start now this independent oversight. Either create a special authority like in Austria, or to allow or to agree to a private foundation vested with sovereign rights like in Germany. Again, everything is possible here, but it has to be done, and only then it can work. For the EPR systems, a lot of more transparency is needed, especially for competitive system, equal treatment of producers. So if a small producer or a big producer is using the same packaging, they should pay the same price because the costs are the same for the collection, sorting, and recycling of the same packaging. And the fees should be more diverse in the future. They should reflect more the real costs. For plastics, I think it is common sense that a PET bottle, a clear PET bottle, has different costs than a multi-layer flexible packaging on the other extreme side. And this should be reflected. This should be reflected in the fees in the future. But now, how can we? The next slide. But how can we reach the circularity in the end? What has to be done now? And what we need first, of course, is that all our member states are now finally implementing the 2018 waste legislation. PROs need investment clarity and security to do the necessary planning. Like we have seen in Belgium, perhaps you have read this latest 3 brand new sorting plants have been started, have been built, have been started. Some new recycling plants have been established, but this of course needs a clear legal framework, which is still missing in a lot of countries. All the stakeholders have to do their bit, including municipalities. Should I continue with an experimental collection system if it is not delivering? No, I should, even if I like my system as a mayor, but I should agree to best practices and implement these in my municipality. The value chains approaches like C-Flex, but also the other materials, they have to deliver now, which they are doing step by step. And of course, we have to be ready on the national, but also on the EU level to fix bugs and loopholes that we are identifying in the existing legislation. I know it is much more sexy to work on new visions and to introduce another target and another obligation. But in the end, we have to implement what is already existing in the best way before we go the next step. That's what we have to do, and I think what can be done in the next weeks and months. So we all need to do the big jump now to be able to deliver the circularity of our packaging, and then the PROs can work in the best way as well. That was my small point of view, and I'm happy to give the floor back to Graham now.
Thank you very much, Joachim, for that interesting introduction to EPR and the complexities that it has in today's market, and that we need to, there are some challenges that we need to overcome to go circular that you alluded to. And I'm very pleased to introduce Mike, who's going to take you through some of the work that both Felix and Joachim have been involved in terms of how do you design EPR systems to work in the circular economy where everything's being collected. Mike, over to you.
Thank you very much, Graham, and good afternoon, everyone. So yes, as Graham explained in his introduction, it became clear to C-Flex that EPR, as he said, was the glue that held everything together in terms of what C-Flex was looking to do. And so I'm just going to take you into a little bit more detail in terms of the work that that C-Flex have been doing on EPR. We set up a working group to look at it specifically in terms of really how EPR could best function and be optimized from a perspective of reaching the C-Flex target of collection and recycling of 80% of flexibles. So this slide I'll not talk about in detail because Graham's already gone through it, but what I wanted to do was look at some of the detail in terms of what we need to do if we're going to meet the targets here. So first of all, design. C-Flex has done a lot of work on design for recycling and has its own guidelines. And clearly this is key to help the recycling and the production of the right quality of recycled polymer that we're going to need to go circular. As part of those design guidelines, C-Flex promote that where possible, monomaterial packaging should be used, for example. Not always possible, but where it is, it should be used. In terms of collection, we're saying that all flexible packaging needs to be collected. In part, that's to meet the European targets, but also obviously the C-Flex targets are actually higher than that. And to get full circularity, really, we need to have everything available to us to meet those targets. And consumers need to understand that they can place flexible packaging into the separate collection systems. Flexibles can be more complex for consumers, and better communicating what they can recycle is needed there as well. In terms of sorting, again, we need to try and capture as much of the flexible packaging as we can in the sorting centres. It's more difficult than other plastics to sort. A lot of it is quite small and so might fall through screens, etc., etc. So the actual capture of the material at the sorting centres is a focus. And in addition, the bale specifications that are produced, a wide variety of bale specifications at the moment across Europe. And really, we feel that particularly when we're going into the small but still significant fractions within the flexible packaging, we need to have standardized bale specifications so that the recyclers have a standard feedstock to make a standard pellet that could be used by industry. And from a recycling perspective, more and more now the discussion is moving on to the end markets for the recycled polymer that's produced. Going back a decade, we were all talking about collection, how we could collect more. And I think it's becoming increasingly apparent that as well as collecting more, we need to look at downstream demand for the recycled polymer. So that leads to what quality of recycled polymer is produced, whether or not you produce a single polymer or a polyolefin pellet, and really matching that recycling capacity with those downstream conversion demand. And as well as all of these factors, you've got research and development that needs to be done, and also we need to create the right conditions for investment as well. So now I'm showing you exactly the same picture, but with how EPR fits into this, because it became very apparent that really EPR is involved in all of these different areas that are key for flexible packaging. So first of all, we have a design. Well, under the Article 8A of the Waste Framework Directive, which Joachim talked you through, eco-modulation of fees are a requirement in the future for EPR systems. So that means that the fees that are paid by the brand owners or the importers of packaging will vary depending on how easily recyclable that packaging is. So that's an area of overlap. In terms of the collection, again, we've heard that actually it's the municipalities that decide what is typically collected together and how it's collected and what colour the bins are, etc., etc. But in some countries, such as Belgium was given an example, there's been a very good job done in terms of harmonising the system. And at the very least, the EPR systems tend to have an influence in terms of the national forums, in terms of putting forward their views on how best things are collected. Again, communication and education campaigns. A lot of the PROs have quite significant budgets now, sometimes in the region of around 5% of turnover of fees to actually spend on communication and educating in terms of packaging recycling. Sorting. Often the sorting centres, or typically the sorting centres even, are run by private waste management companies, but sometimes they're run by pros in some markets, for example in Germany. In other countries such as Spain, the EPR system has a lot of input into the design of those centres. We've seen in Belgium recently where they've introduced flexible packaging and pot stubs and trays to the collection system. Again, there was a heavy involvement from the EPR scheme in terms of how that material should be sorted, what it should be graded into, etc., etc. Bale specifications. EPR are doing work on this to get some harmonisation across Europe. And And yeah, generally a lot of work done with research and development in conjunction with industry and brand owners to work out the best way of collecting recycling material. From a recycling perspective, sometimes the PROs actually own the material, such as the case in Belgium and the case in Italy. In other countries, they're responsible for defining the specifications of the outputs from the sorting centre. So again, there's a heavy involvement of the PROs in terms of what is fed into the recycling system. And as I explained on the last slide, that's key to what the actual recyclers can turn into and what quality they can turn that material into to feed into downstream demands. So where we are today, I think, is on the left. We have EPR schemes, PROs involved in lots of different areas of the supply chain, arguably all of them, to a greater or lesser extent in each of the countries. Again, as Joachim has explained, there's a wide variety of systems when you start to look at the detail across Europe. And I think what we really need to move to is a much more coordinated system so that we can really link all of these really important things together, because to get to where we all need to get to, it's not just one thing that needs to change. It's not just more collection or better sorting. You know, we need to do all of those things that I covered in the last slide, all the way through design, through to thinking about end markets and where you place the polymer, through better sorting, using advanced technologies and recycling, etc., etc. So in terms of the work that CFlex have done in this area, there was a working group set up with the stakeholders you can see in front of you. So Expro was involved, Mars, Nestle, Danone, PepsiCo, Mondelez, MTN Plastics, who are owned by Borealis, to look at how EPR can best function for flexible packaging. We'd ended an internal consultation with brand owners and retailers, to the stakeholders of CFlex. And we're in step 3 at the moment, which is getting individual feedback from EPR schemes. We're due to be running EPR workshops and engaging with various of the European platforms to get their input. And of course, we're interested in feedback from yourselves also, either directly today or afterwards. And then we'll move on into step 4, which is really looking at it on a nation by nation level. Because of those differences that exist, because of the different stages of development, it really is not something you can look at just at a European level. So we've broken it into 4 different segments, the work. Operational, where we're looking at collection, sorting and recycling. Financial, where we're looking at how best to get sustainability in the supply chain in terms of the recycling in particular. That can be a difficult part of the supply chain to get the sustainability there. It can be a difficult sector to be in. Looking at the fees and the eco-modulation, the communication and the messaging, both on design and also consumer awareness, and also some governance aspects as well. So if we look at the operational segment first in terms of a collection, so we're saying, so all of these slides are what we're saying in terms of this is what the EPR really needs to support if it's going to work best for flexible packaging. So all flexible packaging should be collected, not some, or not just LD, or not just PP, but all of it. Separate collection, we feel, is the best way of collecting flexible packaging. So by separate collection, I mean a specific recyclable collection where the recyclables are separated from the residual. And within that separate collection, we feel that where you collect the flexible packaging with a light fraction, so with the metals and with the other plastics and with the drinks cartons, that tends to work best. When you start adding in paper, it gets more complex for the sorting because the flexible packaging tends to flow with the papers rather than the kind of round bottles and tins and cans that tend to roll in a different direction. And also with the glass, obviously broken glass in the flexible plastic can cause an issue. But despite saying that separate collection is the optimal solution, I think we're recognizing as well that capture of flexible packaging from residual waste is also important, because we're not going to get the consumer to put absolutely everything into the separate collection. And there's a lot of good work in this area as well, in particular in the Netherlands and also in Norway, for example. Okay, so here's just a quick schematic of the separate collection. You can see at the bottom there the PMD and the flexible, so the plastic, the metals and the drinks cartons, and the flexible is what we're saying is the best way to collect it separately. The reason you have all of these others above is because actually what happens elsewhere also impacts on that flexible packaging. So for example, we're very supportive of the collection of biodegradable waste, bio waste, so food waste, for example, from households. Because if we can get that separately collected, it means it's not in a residual, which means that the quality of the flexibles you might be able to get from the residuals are better. In terms of the sorting, clearly we need to have the necessary equipment in place to sort the flexible packaging. It can be quite extensive, the different types of equipment you need here. There will be some hand picking, but there will also be wind shifters that will blow the film, optical sorters to move it by polymer, and also we need to look at those bale specifications. A lot of plastic at the moment is either collected, the flexibles, as mixed polyolefin or maybe just as polyethylene, and we're doing a lot of work in terms of testing and trials to work out what is the best split of the flexible packaging. As an example, there's a lot of polypropylene used in flexible household packaging, and yet it's not really at the moment pulled out as a separate stream for recycling. So we're looking at what might be feasible and viable there. Once you've sorted it to the right bale specifications, you need to think about what happens after that. Mechanical recycling clearly is key here. There's lots and lots of potential. It's done on a large scale already throughout Europe. There are lots of technology developments which again C-Flex are doing work on, but are already active in the market in one way or another. So hot washing the film, double filtration, deodorizing, etc., etc. So we're looking at, if you use all of these latest technologies, really what is the quality? How virgin-like can you get that polymer after the recycling? But even with all of these technologies, I think we're also recognizing that chemical recycling has a role to play here. And that's for two reasons. It's on the inputs. So in terms of some of those multi-material formats that we have in flexible packaging, it might be required there to actually take them back to the monomers to use again. Or it might be for downstream reasons in terms of producing something which can be used in food contact application. And in summary, for the sorting centres, there are two things we need to look at. One is that quality, which I've talked a lot about, but that other one is the recovery. How much we can actually capture from the stream. So in other words, how can we maximize the target material that flows into and the capture of that material from the sorting centres rather than losing it to the residual fraction. In terms of recycling, when we talk about circularity in C-Flex, we had a lot of discussion about what we mean by circularity. It means different things to different people. But the conclusion that we came to for flexible packaging was really circularity means getting it back into a recycled polymer that as much as possible is a commodity replacement for as a recycled commodity replacement for the virgin polymer. So it's not just suitable for small niche applications, it's suitable in a wide range of different applications, as broad as possible to ensure that we've got that downstream demand. Again here, EPR, the contractual arrangements, very, very important. Obviously, from a brand owner perspective, understandably, it's very important to have visibility of what you're going to have to pay throughout a year for budgetary purposes. But at the same time, there needs to be mechanisms within the EPR schemes to deal with volatile market conditions. For example, at the moment, there have been very, very strong increases in virgin polymer in the last 3 or 4 months, which is good for the recyclers, of course, but it can move in the other direction. And that changes the economics of the recyclers. And so we need to think about the payment mechanisms for recycling to make sure that they can move fast enough so that the recyclers aren't exposed and get into financial difficulty. So it's all about stability and that sustainability. And yes, the chemical recycling touched on the last slide, so it could be used, for example, for that non-mono material. Sometimes where film is produced from household flexible packaging, the material that's not wanted in that film is ejected prior to the recycling process. Again, that sort of material would be suitable for chemical or could be suitable for chemical recycling, etc., etc. From a financial point of view, financial support to ensure that the recycling takes place, but also sustainability in those markets for the recycled polymer. We need to look at that matching of recycled material with downstream demand, and we need to look at incentivizing the use of recycled content. However, we feel that this should be separated from eco-modulation, which we talked about, which is coming in for EPR schemes, because really they are different things. One is about incentivizing demand, and the other one is about whether or not something is, how recyclable a product is. And obviously it can get quite confusing if you can change the effectively recyclability of something by putting more recycled content in. Obviously they're two different things and not exactly the same. So we feel that that's best done separately. Supporting long-term investment decisions for sorting and recycling. So that could be through long-term contracts, guaranteed access to in-feed materials, even if the pricing changes, and also how EPR can help and does help, but how it can continue to help in the future with funding of R&D programs, communication programs. And I think there was a recognition in the working group that can work quite well where there's no competition in the market, but it's one of the challenges where there is competition in the EPR market. How you can still have these important activities taking place, because obviously if there's competition, if one scheme pays for the communication and another one doesn't, it could put them at a commercial disadvantage. And there are ways around that through fixed fees or through central bodies that might coordinate it, and these need to be looked at. So eco-modulation as well, we've been looking at this. I mean, the concept of eco-modulation we feel should fit with the requirement for full net costs to be paid. Another one of the requirements that came in under this Article 8A of the Waste Framework Directive. So full net cost, by full net cost, we mean that when you take a piece of packaging, after you collected it, you know, the fee should pay for the collection, for the sorting, and for the recycling. Obviously, sometimes the recycling is a revenue and it can be netted off against the sorting and the collection costs, but overall those fees should pay for the whole supply chain activity. And eco-modulation, we need to work, so some fees are higher, some fees are lower, but ultimately you end up at that full net cost. And as Joachim talked about earlier, we need to look at the different formats even within plastics, because they're very different costs to move. Again, using Joachim's example, a PET bottle through the supply chain compared to some flexible formats. And where there are no recycling options at the moment, that money raised from fees should be used directly to try and find recycling solutions. So that might be innovative technologies, more research and development to try and remove those barriers that might be in place for the recycling. Quickly on communication, we need clear reporting, I think, on collection and sorting and recycling for all packaging by format as well as by polymer where possible. I mean, one of the challenges for CFlex and when doing this work is access to data, access to information to analyze the market and to look at progress and development and targets and where improvements can be met. So reporting by that format would be very, very useful. Transparency on how fees are spent, not surprisingly, you know, is a request from brand owners. Clear messaging to consumers in terms of that flexible packaging can be recycled. So that could be on banks, could be on packaging itself, and funding of communication and education campaigns. And we're putting here typically around 5% of the fee income, which is what is the case in a number of different countries, around that sort of number. And also that communication is also on the design as well. Again, from a design owner perspective, what they don't want is one country saying this is what good looks like and a neighboring country having a different opinion and pulling in a different direction. So that design messaging is important as well. Governance, again, a request from the working group that representation in the PROs is aligned to the financial input. And also that within PROs there should be technical expertise on flexible packaging, as it is one of the more complex streams in terms of taking decisions on how best it should be collected. So finally, in terms of the next steps, yeah, what we really need to look at next are those country-specific plans. Very different situations in different countries. Some countries have been collecting flexible packaging for many years, and it might be more tweaking and developing and looking at the sorting. In other countries, such as the UK, flexible packaging really isn't collected at all at the moment from the household, or very small amounts. And so it's a more fundamental look in those countries. So each country needs a separate plan. Graham.
Thanks, Mike. Very good. As I'm thinking the audience is hopefully understanding, there is some work to be done, and we'll engage in explaining, going to some more of those criteria for circularity as we're recording them with Mike later on in the discussion of the Q&A. Last chart, Mike alluded to it, I alluded to it, Joachim alluded to it. This is the vision for C-Flex. Collect it all, get at least 80% of the materials entering a recycling process to be returned to the economy, and above all, have sustainable end markets for those materials so that they substitute virgin. It now is my pleasure to introduce Felix Pozzati from Mars to take us through the brand owner perspective, because at the end of the day, the brand owners and the retailers are the producers in EPR. Felix, do you want to control your own slides? There we go, all yours. You might be muted. If you can turn your video on.
Can you hear me now? Yes.
There we go, perfect.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for the invitation. So let me give you the brand owner's perspective. I'm always starting my presentation and slide with this one. As a brand owner, we want our packaging to be recycled, obviously, and we at Mars, we are heavily dependent on flexible packaging. The conditions to make our packaging recycled, they are two. The first one is about the design. So how we can design our packaging to be attractive to the recycling infrastructure. So the monomaterial that was mentioned, what kind of resins, etc., of resin combination, what we can use there. And the second piece is the recycling infrastructure as such. So we can have a perfect packaging from design perspective, but if the infrastructure, it is not in place to take this packaging, to collect it, sort it, and recycle it, there is no chance that this packaging will be really recycled in practice and at scale. When it comes to the design, it's quite obvious in a way that it is in our hands. As brand owners, we control what type of packaging we put in the market. And we can make there the good combination so that we can give it a maximum of chances to be recycled and attractive to the recycling industry. But when it comes to the recycling infrastructure, we do not have a direct control. We can have an indirect control, luckily enough in Europe through the EPR schemes, but in other parts of the world, we don't have this chance. So we really depend on what the local situation it is when it comes to the infrastructure. But since here we are talking about Europe, I think it was quite well mentioned in the previous presentation about the EPR, etc. But to keep it very simple, when it comes to the infrastructure, we as brand owners, the role that we can play, it's definitely through the EPR fees, for the collection and sorting mainly. And the stakeholders that we have to manage there, it's mainly the municipalities. So the municipalities will be the one that they will propose a collection bin, they will invest in the sorting, and of course, through the money that will be injected by the EPR fees. When it comes to the recycling as such, we can also play a role. And here the role that we can play, it's mainly by using recycled material, because the more we use recycled material, the more we'll have waste that it was transformed to this recycled material that we can use back. So we can create this demand. Is it enough or not? Again, it depends, but we can also have a role there, an indirect role. So again, to summarize quickly, the infrastructure is important, And when it comes to the flexible packaging, it's this infrastructure today that we want to see it developing. I'm trying to go to my next slide, Graham, but
there we go.
okay. So when it comes to the infrastructure, I think Michael touched also based on this, but I'm calling here the North Star. So what are the conditions that we want in place for this infrastructure so that it can enable our packaging to have a maximum of chances to be recycled? So first of all, we don't want leakage, meaning that we want all flexible in a way being collected. Even in the worst case scenario, even through a residual bin, but we don't want flexible packaging to end up in nature. And once it's collected, this to be properly managed. I mean, it sounds quite obvious when it comes to Europe, but when we go outside Europe, and especially in Southeast Asia, this is a huge problem when it comes to flexible packaging. We want the flexible to be collected. I mean, it starts from the collection. If the packaging is not collected, there is no chance to be recycled. So we obviously want it to be collected. And the conditions there mentioned by Michael that we want paper and glass being separately collected. We want, of course, to be sorted. The recycling, so here the recycling, it's about acknowledging also not only the mechanical recycling, but also the chemical advanced recycling as a recycling technology that can deal with flexible packaging. And of course, we want the EPR schemes that they are in place to support the flexible packaging recycling. We are today in a paradox situation where as brand owners, we are paying a lot of EPR fees even for flexible packaging, but not a lot of this EPR fee contribution that we pay to EPR schemes is re-injected to invest in the collection and sorting of flexible packaging. So that's why here it is a condition that these EPR fees will need also to support the collection and sorting of flexible packaging. So, I mean, it was already mentioned by Michael, but these different ways of collection and sorting, and there is one thing that it's obvious, it's like when paper is collected together with plastic and special flexible plastic, the system is not working. So there are few countries today where we see the collection and sorting, like especially Germany, Netherlands, and Austria, that they have these famous 5 bins, like a separate bin for glass, for paper, this famous PMD bin, like plastic, metal, and drinkable cartons. And here it's where we see the collection and sorting of flexibles being advanced. There is this second group, I mean, the group, what I call C here, is like they have this system in place, but still the collection and sorting is limited. So here it will be more investments that we need to see on the collection and sorting. And then there is this D and E group where plastic is collected together with paper. And when we focus in Europe, it will be mainly the UK, France, and Greece. And in this case, it is a big challenge to start collecting the flexibles and then having them properly sorted and recycled. So we would like this group D and E to move to the system B, at least. I think, yeah. So very quickly, I mean, it was already mentioned, but we need this innovative technology such as the chemical advanced recycling. Here, just for the technical people in this call, I mean, there are 3 main resins that they make more than 80% of plastic packaging today, both rigids and flexibles. So PET, mainly used for the beverage bottles, and then PE and PP that use both in rigid and flexible applications. The only resin today, at least in Europe, that goes back to food grade application, it's PET bottles that can go back to bottles or to trays. And this is also linked with the chemical structure of PET that offers this possibility to go easier to food grade applications. When it comes to the polyolefins, so PE and PP, as you can see, even what is recycled today, mainly in the rigid applications, all of them, they go in non-food grade applications. So PE, for example, in the building, mainly in the building industry, PP in the automotive. In the case of flexible PE, we have some of them recycled back to garbage bag. So it's still a flexible application, but it's not a food grade application. And this is the limitation here of the mechanical recycling. It's also linked to the chemical structure of PE and PP that makes it more complicated to have food grade applications back through the mechanical recycling. And again, as part of this whole puzzle that we are building, we need also these innovative technologies so that they can help us to scale the recycling of flexibles. Just to finish 2 slides on the EPR, because it was the topic as such, but we need those conditions, and we need now to see how the EPR can support those things to happen at the system level. So far, we have been paying EPR fees to what I would call the solidarity approach. So, and especially when it comes to plastic, it used to be like a flat price. We can still see it today in Germany, for example. So we had the whole cost. We were dividing by the volumes, and everyone was paying a fee. So this, in a way, was making everybody happy for a moment because we were hitting the targets, but without mentioning which type of packaging was recycled. The challenge that we see of pursuing this scheme is like we don't have the transparency, and different type of packaging, the ones that they were easier to recycle or they were more attractive from a business point of view, they will have very high recycling rates, where the others that they were a little bit less attractive from a business point of view, they will have lower recycling rates. But at the end, everyone was happy because we were hitting the target, the average target. We see the change going to what I call the net cost approach. So the net cost approach, it means that for every type of packaging format, there is a given cost. There is a cost on the collection and sorting minus the revenue that this material can bring. And I will explain on the next slide. So here we are talking more about variable EPR fees per material and packaging format. So we see this very well implemented, for example, today in Belgium, Netherlands, France and Spain. They are applying this principle. It is a fair way to distribute the cost, because at the end, we are paying the real cost. So if flexible, it's more expensive to collect and sort, fine, we are fine with this, but we need this transparency from the system. And there is also power to advocate in a way for improvements of the recycling system, because in the case of flexible, we know that not a lot of investment is happening there. And in this way, by the moment that we pay higher fees, we can also, it's not anymore about obligations, but it's also about rights. So by the moment that we pay more, we can also have more rights on asking why we are going to pay more. And please, the more that we are paying, just make the investment, especially for the flexibles. And just to finish, and I think it was also a question maybe here on the net cost. So here is to give you an idea about the landfill and incineration cost. For those of you that you are not aware, but the landfill cost, it's around 100 euros per ton. Incineration, depending the countries, can go up to 200 euros per ton. So the blue part on the bar here, it's showing the net cost that I was saying before. So it's the cost of collection and sorting minus the revenue that the material can bring. So in the case of a PET bottle, we can see that this net cost, it's around 400 to 500 euros per ton. And we know that a PET bottle will bring a revenue of 350. In the case of flexibles, as you can see, the net cost is much higher because the collection and sorting cost is between 500 to 700 euros per ton. But we still today need to pay either what we call a gate fee. So we pay recycles to make this material attractive for them and to treat it. Or in the best case scenarios, we can sell it, but it won't be, this revenue from the material won't be more than 100 euros per ton. So we really end up with a higher net cost, almost the double for if we compare to rigid plastic. But in a way, it's again what I was saying before, from a brand perspective, we are okay to pay these higher fees by the moment that we see this money being injected in the system to optimize the collection and sorting of flexibles so that they can be attractive for the recycling industry. So I will probably stop here, Graham, but I think the main message was there.
Thank you very much, Felix. Yes, a very clear main message. Perhaps you can give me back control. If you can just stop control, then I can advance the screen. Thank you very much. I would now like to invite the rest of the panel, so Joachim and Mike, to put their cameras on, and we'll start the panel discussion. We'll also take questions from the audience. So if I can just look through there, we will be sharing the slides after this via the ISPT site. And there's a question from Matthijs Rotenbeck. How high should EPR fees be to cover the needs of the circular economy versus covering the needs for waste incineration? So Felix, you just alluded to this in your last chart, so I thought it would be quite good for you to start on this question.
Yeah, so as you have seen in the last chart, we are still not competitive with the incineration price. So mainly today, the materials that they can be competitive there, it's paper, glass, and some of the metals. But when it comes to the plastic, all of the plastic, they have a net cost higher than the incineration fees. So at the end, it's what I was saying. It's like we know that it will cost more to collect and sort flexibles. We are fine with it. But the money that we are asked to pay more, we want to see it being injected in the system.
Thank you. Joachim, same question. You know where EPR fees are today. How challenging is it going to be to move from EPRs designed to meet minimum recycling targets to EPRs designed to deliver the circular economy for materials like flexible packaging?
I think the big challenge is really to change the mindset and the vision of EPR, and this is, I think, not the big problem for Felix and his colleagues. We have to take on board also all the medium-sized and small companies. I think for them it will be more and more a shock if they see the prices increasing over the next few years, and we have to convince them that it is the right investment to do, because there are, for very sure, there are stakeholders who will offer you very cheap solutions, and they might be very attractive for 1, 2, or 3 years. So I think this is the challenge, that we keep industry on board, not so much the big guys, because you have more the helicopter view. You understand the challenges also on the political level. As smaller the companies are, I think it will be more difficult, and we need to be more convincing to keep them on board and to avoid that some Wild West solutions are implemented.
Yeah, I think there's a mindset change, as you alluded to going down the circular economy route in terms of, instead of just taking the lowest cost option, which could be landfill or waste to energy. And the system has to be funded to allow the circularity to be paid for and for people to make a good living out of that. A question from my side, Felix. You painted a very supportive picture from a brand owner perspective. To what extent do you think your perspective is shared by the other brand owners? And we have a large number of them participating in CFlex.
It's a very good question, Graham. And when it comes to, I mean, just to reflect on the flexible packaging as such, I think that we all know that flexible packaging is extremely important for us. Not only because it uses very low quantities of material in a way, has a very low carbon footprint, but first and foremost is a great packaging. It's what we ask a packaging to do. It's to protect the goods that we want to deliver. So it is a great packaging. Now we know that flexible packaging, as brand owners, we know that it has its challenges when it comes to the recycling. So to keep this packaging and to keep our right to continue using this type of packaging, we are more than ready to take into account and to take our responsibility when it comes to the waste management of this type of packaging. And I think there is an alignment also with the brand owners. We have seen it through few how can I say, organization. I mean, not even with CFlex, even if we go to the Consumers Good Forum, to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, I think that we are all supportive behind what is happening now and paying a fair price to continue having this packaging. We know that it comes with a responsibility, and we'll try our best to increase the circularity of such type of packaging.
Thank you very much. Mike, question for you. You alluded, Joachim alluded to the differences in EPR systems. There is one country that used to be part of the EU, which is now not, that is busy putting in place an EPR system from scratch. Perhaps you could give us a little insight into where we are in that process and what the UK is planning. And
yeah, well, yes, I mean you're right. I mean the UK is transitioning or planning to move from effectively a traded certificate way of funding the collection of packaging to a full EPR system. So the two are very, very different. In the past, the system was designed to meet a target, and then the funding would literally fall away. It was designed to fall away to nothing ultimately if that target was being met. And the UK before Brexit brought the European law into its domestic law, so it's still looking at the Article 8A, which Joachim went through, and so he's looking at full net costs. And the old system wasn't designed as a principle to meet full net costs, and so the work now is to bring in the system which is also bring in factors such as eco-modulation. So at the moment it's in the second consultation stage. Came out about 2 weeks ago, if I remember correctly, for the EPR, and the plan is now to bring in the changes in 2 steps, with the first one in 2023, which I think people are recognizing is quite ambitious, and then a second stage in 2024. I think probably from a flexible packaging perspective, it's probably also worth very briefly mentioning that there are other consultations at the same time. One is DRS, for deposit return systems, which is planning to remove glass, metal drinks, cans, and PET bottles from a system, which obviously will have an impact potentially in terms of the flows of material. And the other one is something called consistent collections, which is where each municipality needs to collect a minimum number of material, minimum type of materials, and flexible packaging again is one of those ones that's been discussed in terms of will it be in those minimum required collections from municipalities or won't it?
Thank you. While I've got you on the podium, C&I film, so this is non-consumer household flexible packaging. It's a significant quantity in most markets. Where do you increasingly it's staying in Europe because of things like the Basel Convention and other countries closing their doors to that traditionally imported these materials. Can you maybe say a few words on what you think is going to happen with C&I film and how it might become part of the circular economy?
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly very, very important, because if everyone does their jobs right and we meet our ambitions, and at the end of the day, what the recyclers are producing is a PE pellet or a PP pellet, which can be used as a commodity. And therefore, really, where the different film streams join up is at that conversion stage after the recycling. So C&I films, as you rightly say, is a huge amount of material. Historically, it's been driven to lower cost economies because it was manually sorted to remove things such as labels and trays, etc., etc. And for the reasons that you've said, more and more now it's been recycled closer to home, either within the EU or also Turkey is a big market for that material. Really, in terms of the work we do in terms of where to place the household material, it's very important to consider what also happens to that C&I material or the agricultural film material, because they ultimately can all go into similar applications. To pick an example, I think Felix mentioned earlier, the refuse sacks, the bin bags, yeah, they're made from C&I plastic, they're made from household plastic. I'm not sure about agricultural, but in principle, I guess they could be as well. And so we really need to see how all of these fit together, so that we find homes for everything and process the different streams to the right levels to ensure that everything has a home, but also environmentally, economically, we have the best model.
Thank you very much. We do have one other question on the chat about the best available techniques for chemical recycling of mixed flexible packaging waste. This is not really the right forum for that question, but in CFlex we have been looking at this, and what we're in the process of developing a position statement on recycling technologies, because as we alluded to, we need all the recycling technologies out there to make sure we can meet the needs of the end markets. And there are a wide range of chemical recycling technologies, as I'm sure many of you on this call know, but they're not all equal in terms of the polymers that they target and the qualities that they seek to deliver. So for the flexible packaging workhorse polymers of polyethylene and polypropylene, we think that pyrolysis offers at the moment the most promise in terms of taking a maybe not too clean waste stream and then recycling it back into some pyrolysis oil, and then that pyrolysis oil becomes an infeed into the cracker to make new virgin plastics. Gasification has higher costs and higher environmental impacts, we believe, at this point in time, which is why our preference is for that. We are seeing other depolymerization or monomerization techniques which may be applicable to things like PP, but this is all unfolding as we speak, so it's very difficult to provide a concrete answer to that question. So I think we've got time for one last question, and this is to all of the panel members. CFlex has set our goal by 2025. We want flexible packaging to go circular. We've heard how important EPR systems are today. How fast can we do this? I mean, can we change EPR systems? What do you think the timescales are in Europe to be able to deliver this. So maybe starting with Mike.
Oh, so a nice easy question to end on. How fast? Well, I think obviously by 2025 is not so long away. I mean, there's a lot that needs to happen in terms of the rate determining steps. Obviously, policy and legislation. You know, if any changes or tweaks are required there, and I think some would be beneficial. They're obviously quite long term. In terms of the practicalities in the supply chain, there's a lot happening now, which is very positive. New technologies, both in recycling and sorting. But again, ultimately, in terms of some of these changes within the sorting centres, it did take realistically several years to plan and put in place. So I think we're setting ourselves a pretty aggressive target by 2025. But I think I'm confident that we can go a long way there. And I think the important thing is to get a consensus view about how best to move forward, because at the moment there are so many different views and there are so many different levels of knowledge as well. So I think that role as well is one that is very important for CFlex to play. So yeah, quite aggressive, but we could do a lot by 2025.
Felix, maybe a shorter version. What's your projected date?
Very good question. No, I will completely agree with Mike. It will take years. It's just practical in a way. I mean, it's not even about the EPR, just to put the system in place, and then we'll finance it through the EPR, but just to put the system in place, it's a question of years. Get the consumer, get used to resort in a way the flexibles, to put them in the right bin. It will take years. But I completely agree with Mike. We really need this, what I was calling North Star. We need to define our vision, where we need to go. And I think things will be much easier by the moment that we know where we need to go, and we just build based on this.
Okay, thank you. So Joachim, I set out to 2025. What do I need? What does CFlex need to do to persuade your member EPRs to adopt the criteria for circularity?
I don't think that you need to persuade them much, because if you just take the plastic minimum, the new plastic minimum target for 25 and the new measurement point, and then you make a very simple calculation. You have to collect 80% of the plastic packaging put on the market. And then you have to sort out of this input 80%, and then put it to recycling, and the yield should be 80% as well. And then you are just hitting the target. And this is already, I think, a very big challenge for all of us. But I'm sure that I think half of the member states will be able to do it.
Excellent.
But as usual, we will see half of the member states running behind the rest. And I'm afraid most of them will be the same that are very late with the municipal waste targets that have been due for 2020 already. So that's something, I think, a message we should give to the Commission all the time. Let's not forget the challenges for many countries. They need help, and they don't need new targets, and industry as well. But this is not a sexy message, of course. Because we like to pass visions and solutions.
Very good, thank you. And I'll come back to thank my panelists, but I just wanted to hand back to Clarche quickly to take us through the next steps in the circular plastic group of events.
Yes, well, thank you, Graham. And on my behalf and EPI, I would like to thank all of you for this interesting afternoon. This was just part one. Before I explain to you what you can find in part two, I will shortly show you the program. In April the 29th, we'll have two more sessions that are more on product stewardship. And the other one, which moves very quickly, is on the chemical depolymerization and solvolysis. So please join us for that. And then in May the 20th, we have our final session where we all gather all the information output from these sessions. And there we will look at the lessons learned, the next steps to be taken, and we'll also look at the societal challenges that lie ahead. So please join us in May also. Then the next slides, because we're going to close, Brain is going to close this session in a minute. You can go back to the network app, and there you can click on the program where you can join our virtual rooms. And there our speakers will be from this session, but also from the parallel session about mechanical recycling. And you can have an interactive discussion with them and ask your questions. So please join us. Go to the network app, click on program, and then click on the room you would like to meet. And for me, the last slide. Yes, that's the one. And then there's one more slide because I want to show you a little bit more about the network app. It's as it says, it's a network app, but there's more to do than just discuss. You can also raise questions in the quest, show who's participating, and say hello to somebody and make a connection if it's convenient for you. And you can schedule appointments or just say hi. So I'm looking forward to see you in the second part of this session in a while.
Great, thank you very much, Katja. We're, oops, not sure we got, there we go. So I would like to draw the session to a close and to thank all of our participants who've been with us for the last hour and a half. It's a big investment in your time. Hopefully you found it worthwhile. I'd also like to give a big thank you to our speakers for sharing their time and their